Okay, so I'm going to be doing a video on Battlefield 1 with the Steam Deck, and we're going to be starting it off with 800p on the lowest settings. Alright, let's jump into the settings. Now for this video, I'm going to cut this into two sections, a campaign portion and a multiplayer portion, because they act differently. The multiplayer is definitely more intensive compared to the campaign, since there's more players, it's 64 players, so it runs worse. But in the campaign, we're going to be getting around 80 to 90 FPS on average, which is fantastic on the lowest settings. We do get some dips into the mid-70s at times, and we peak around 100 FPS at a max range. Recently, EA updated the clients, so it's using the EA app now instead of Origin. So you want to use Proton Experimental for the game to run. If you use anything else, the game will just bug out and you'll get a gray screen at the login screen and you can't continue. So make sure you use the Experimental Proton to be able to play the game. Alright, now here's the game running at a 60 FPS cap. As you can see, it's running far smoother compared to having an uncapped frame rate. But the power draw is about the same since we're pulling 10 watts now on the CPU instead of 7 watts from what we had before with the uncapped frame rate. So the power draw will be around 25 to 26 watts, which won't give you too much battery life, but there's not much we can do in this game. I did try playing at 40 FPS and I'll show the footage of that as well. But spoilers, it doesn't feel the best. It feels very laggy at 40, so I wouldn't recommend it. I would stick to maybe 50 to 60 FPS for the FPS cap, and the game feels fantastic at that point. At 40, again, this feels too laggy, so I would avoid it. With medium settings, you're sitting around 70 to 80 FPS, but on average I would say you're going to be sitting in the mid-70s with some dips into the 60s in those heavier scenes, and in those lighter scenes we're going to be sitting in the low to mid-80s, which is still beautiful. This game is running fantastically on the Steam Deck. It's still a very beautiful game and it's very intensive as well. I remember I couldn't run this game at the time on my PC. I was obviously playing at 1080p, but still I could only get 60 FPS, pretty much at most, with my computer back in the day. But now we're able to get above 60 FPS very easily, and you do get some dips into the multiplayer at times, unfortunately. But the game is super CPU intensive, so it kind of does make sense. But for the most part, I could still get a good experience out of it. Now with the 60 FPS cap, the game's running beautifully. We're not getting any stuttering, any lagging like before. Obviously it makes sense since we have a 10 FPS headroom with the uncapped frame rate, so shouldn't fall below it. And the game definitely does look better as well, medium settings compared to low settings. Again, mainly the anti-aliasing is helping us out. But if you had anti-aliasing for the low preset, it will definitely help the look a bunch. So you don't really have to play at the medium preset to get the best out of it. Now I did find a glitch with this game. I'm not sure if it's with the Steam Deck or the controller itself. But with the preset menu or the settings menu, I couldn't scroll down all the way until I applied the custom preset. Then I could scroll down all the way to the bottom of the screen. So it's a bit weird. There's a couple of bugs to this game, but gameplay wise, it was fine. It ran perfectly. With the high preset, I was sitting around 62 to 65 FPS on average, and in those lighter scenes I was sitting around the low 70s, so it's still quite good, but we are pretty much risking a 60 FPS target. In those heavy scenes you might fall down into the mid 50s or in the low 50s. Now personally didn't experience that when I was playing through this level, but I wouldn't be surprised if it does happen in those heavier scenes. So far for the campaign, I would get a mix of medium to high settings. I think that's the sweet spot for the campaign mode. You can give yourself a bit of headroom as well, a 10 FPS headroom in case of a heavy scene, so you don't fall below 60. And you can obviously go ahead and just use a medium preset or low preset as well, if you like how that looks as well. But with the low settings, just use anti-aliasing. Alright, now finally with the ultra preset, this was definitely very intensive. It became unplayable at times as well. We were sitting in the low 60s for the most part, but we had some dips into the 50s and even the high 40s at times, so definitely very intensive, and obviously I would avoid playing like this with the Steam Deck. Okay, now we're following up to the multiplayer portion of the video. At 800p on the lowest settings, we're able to get 60 to 80 FPS. I know it's a wide range, but it depends on the maps that you're playing on. On this map here, the buildings are blocking up our line of sight, so we are leaning towards the higher range at 70 to 80 FPS. But on those maps where you can see a lot of landscape, you will drop down into the 60s and even 50s at times. Now something else to keep in mind is that you do get aim assist in multiplayer as well. It's not as strong as you would expect. It kicks in when you're close to an enemy, so it's a bit hard to get used to it, and you're wasting keyboard and mouse players, so I don't know if it's recommended to play like this, but FPS wise it is definitely playable. With the uncapped frame rate though, we are getting some stuttering and some slowdowns, But as you can see with the 60 FPS cap, the game's running far better, far more smoother, definitely more consistent as well with the frame rate. You will still fall down to the 50s, I've seen it happen. It's mostly due to the CPU bottleneck. This game is very CPU intensive, and we are playing a 64-player server. So ideally stick to those 32-player lobbies, or even smaller if you can find them. With 64 players, you will drop down into the 50s, and 40s, the worst case scenario. So if you're cool with that, go ahead and play 64 players, but ideally, again, play on the small servers. And at medium settings, as you can see, we are already sitting in the 50s. I think everyone saw this one coming. We're already very super bottlenecked, and now we're being powered into as well on top of that. So if you're going to be playing a lot of multiplayer, then I would obviously avoid playing at the medium preset or higher. Stick to the lowest to get the most frames out of the Steam Deck. Alright, now with the optimized settings, we're playing with a mix of low to medium settings and some set to high. We are playing the game at 1152 by 720 as well, using FSR. And I gotta say, this game looks amazing with FSR. It actually helps the clarity of the game. You can see further and more with it enabled. It looks very sharp, and I could definitely spot enemies better with it, surprisingly. The game's FPS was around 60 FPS. We did have some dips into the mid-50s still, unfortunately. But again, if you want to get the most frames out of it possible, play on the lowest settings and play at this resolution with FSR. Alright, now playing with the 40 FPS cap, the game felt very laggy and very sluggish. We obviously could hold 40 FPS fine, and it does help the battery life a little bit. But the game was pretty much unplayable. I couldn't aim, wouldn't play like this, just stick to 60 or 50 FPS, worst case scenario. And it's a pretty good time, to be honest. But the battery life will always be around an hour and a half. Couldn't improve it too much further, which is unfortunate, but it is what it is. And yeah, that's it for the video, guys. If you made it this far, appreciate you. As always, glad to see you. Don't like and subscribe to the channel. See you next time.